Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the NOTCAST. I'm going to follow up with a bit of feedback from the previous episodes. Firstly, the Kraftwerk remasters, and secondly, about the David Bowie box sets. With the Kraftwerk remasters, one question I didn't actually answer was, are they any good and should you buy them? The answers are yes and yes, if you like Kraftwerk. If you don't, save the money. The other one is around the David Bowie box sets. The feedback I'm getting is that it is extremely very niche indeed. That's absolutely correct. There's probably only about 20 people in the world that are interested in the content of that particular episode, and I'm going to talk about something a little less boring. I'm going to talk about one of the problems that's facing the world at the moment. Perhaps not a problem that necessarily, or an issue that maybe you might not have even thought of. Yesterday, it was announced by Yahoo, that very old and practically archaic website, that they were going to be closing a thing called Yahoogroups down on the 15th of December 2020. Now that in itself might not mean anything to the majority of you. I'm going to talk about how that decision and the issues that we have around preserving and archiving our digital history will be enormously problematic in the future, for future historians. First and foremost, I think maybe a little bit of a history tour. I'm of the age now where I grew up before the internet existed, before mobile phones existed, where the only way that you could experience a film was to go and see it at the cinema, and then wait 3 years until it would come on British television, because there was a 3-year gap, which was mandated by the broadcasting laws at the time. And also, the only way that you could hear a band play live would be to go and see them, or perhaps to wait until they possibly released an expansive double live gatefold album, recorded, of course, at the Hammersmith Apollo, or as it was known then, the Hammersmith Odeon, the venue of dreams, a place where when I was a child, I dreamed of going to places where the live albums had been recorded. And one of the things I'm going to talk about at some point is around music history and how history is being rewritten on a daily basis. So with Yahoogroups announcing that they're closing on the 15th of December, what I'm going to talk about is the issues that we have around preserving our digital history and how that's going to make an accurate reconstruction of history in the future for the people that didn't live through it is going to be, to all intents and purposes, practically impossible. So early days of the internet, if you wanted to communicate with other people, you would do it through a thing called Usenet. Then you would do things like called IRC, which is the Internet Relay Chat function, which is effectively just like a huge chat room. Then there were individual websites that were built on platforms like GeoCities, for example. GeoCities was closed at the end of 2009, and a lot of information, a lot of very primitive early websites were destroyed and lost completely. Now the pretty much the whole internet in 1991 could now probably fit on this, which is an 8 gigabyte SanDisk graphic card that's used in every mobile phone. And 8 gig is nothing. My mobile phone has a memory of something like 512 gig. So you could have put the whole of the internet on my phone. I mean, even now, the calculators that we use are more powerful than the computers that took mankind to the moon in 1969. And my calculator has yet to take me to the moon. So what we've got is really almost as if someone is deliberately going through history, and they're destroying the archives, they're deleting the data, they're getting rid of the story around how the world in the early days of the internet existed. There's a website called Archive, and there's one called the Wayback Machine, which if you request it, they will reproduce the sites and they will copy the contents thereof. But again, that only works when someone actually deliberately goes through the process of making a decision to digitally preserve parts of the internet. And a lot of the things which have happened over time, a lot of the early primitive websites have just disappeared. Barely anybody remembers websites like Dan's Gallery of the Grotesque or Rotten.com, which when I was a 20-something, many thousands of years ago, I go, oh, you can see some Polaroids that somebody took of how proud they were after they did a murder. You can see someone being decapitated in Polaroid form. All those websites disappeared, obviously replaced by other ones. But what we're doing is we're seeing a deliberate scrubbing of history. A lot of very, very important things that have happened, especially in the early days of the internet, especially in the changes in culture that we had in the last 30 years, will become unavailable and lost forever as a result of mass deletion by corporations of data which they stored, which they now no longer regard as profitable. Now, from one point of view, that's almost to be welcomed. There's an awful lot of garbage that's out there. Some could argue that there's still an awful lot of garbage out there. But the important thing actually is that there are going to be huge chunks of historically important data that we're going to need to try and understand what it was like to be alive in 1996 or 2006 or 2016. And that information is not going to be there. Somebody somewhere will have destroyed it. They will have unplugged a hard drive. They will have wiped the data. It will be gone forever, and gone forever, extinct. It never ever comes back. Even now there are lost motion pictures, lost records. The only copies of certain performances exist in private circles, if they exist at all. I'm pretty sure I've got the only copy of some live performances which have been made by some fairly major bands that have never been digitized, never been put on the internet. Going through and talking about bootleg tapes here. Now, this bootleg tape may not mean very much to most of you. I'm not sure it means necessarily a huge amount to me even. But this is a recording of the Wonder Stuff, and it's a recording of the Wonder Stuff in Leicester on the 19th of March 1992. The only reason this recording still exists is because I haven't thrown it away yet. Now, that was recorded by somebody sneaking a Walkman into a concert venue, pressing record on a tape recorder, and standing fairly still somewhere where the sound was quite good. So it's not even a recording of the band, it's a recording of the air and the vibrations in the air that was in the room at the same time as the band were performing. Now, over time, that was then transferred onto a cassette tape. The cassette tape was duplicated. There were maybe a few hundred copies of that were made. It was then turned into a bootleg LP, which I purchased, and it was then kind of transferred onto a bootleg VHS tape, which I still have, and the show is now uploaded on YouTube. But that's only because someone's made the decision to do it. And what we're looking at is other things. Maybe that particular Wonder Stuff performance may not necessarily be regarded as historically important by some people. It is to others. And what we're looking at is actually a mass deletion and destruction of history. Now, by its very nature, life is change, history is change, we change over time. I'm not the same person that I was when that was recorded. I looked very different. I was a very different kind of person. I had a very different set of experiences. But if you don't understand how you got to where you are, you have no understanding of where you are. You don't have any understanding of where you're going to go in future, or why you're going to be making the decisions that you're going to be making. It's really, really important, I think, for the digital history of mankind to be preserved. When people start to go back to the early days of Twitter, some of those tweets are going to have been deleted. Some of the some of the information which will be very historically important will have been destroyed. As you know, Donald Trump, the currently kind of like rules by Twitter, and he makes decisions by Twitter, and he announces policy changes by Twitter, and if those tweets get deleted, there is no record whatsoever of those tweets. There is no reason why he might not tweet something incredibly poor and risky and dangerous about a man who I think he called Kim Jong-il. I think he's currently the leader of North Korea. He called him the Rocket Man by tweet. If that tweet's deleted, there is no record whatsoever of a major diplomatic incident that could potentially have started a war. And then in the future, historians are going to be sitting around going, how did this happen? I got nothing, guys. what am I working with? And it's really important that we preserve history, and we preserve the records of history and what happened and how we got here. Because if we don't understand how we got here, we don't understand how we can get out of here. And so whilst you may think, it's just a record collection that I've got behind me. Yes, it is, but also it is a museum of mass-produced art that I love, but it's also, there's history here. Every record that I've got in this room, every CD, every bit of music has a very specific memory that's attached to it that I will very easily be able to give you a story about. Now, I'm just going to lead over here to Nine Inch Nails' Pretty Hate Machine album. Possibly the best album of the 80s, was released in 1989. This specific CD I have owned for 31 years. I imported it from America. It cost me £14.99. I ordered it from a shop that was in the Bullring shopping centre that has now been demolished. There are so many memories that are wrapped up in this particular album, in the songs that are in this particular album, and very formative experiences around that. And every single one of those records, every single one of those events, that all leads to that point. And what I find is really difficult is that, by its very nature, time changes, life changes, formats change, and we're in risk of losing huge things which are very, very important, that have been part of the building blocks of our reality. So, for example, I'm going to pick out something here, which may or may not mean anything to any of you. So here is a VHS tape of The Cure, recorded in 1986 at the amphitheatre. It's The Cure in Orange. It's never been on DVD, let alone Blu-ray, even though it was recorded on film. Robert Smith has been telling us since about 2002 that it was just about to come out. It hasn't been available officially for something like 30 years. There are no digital versions of that are available, and for some reason, when they're uploaded on YouTube, they get deleted very, very quickly. Now, even taking that into account, the fact that which is historically important to Cure fans has effectively fallen out of circulation. The only place I've got that show in a digital form officially is on a bootleg CD or perhaps a YouTube download. The only place where I've physically got it officially released is 2 songs on this 7-inch single, which are 6 Different Ways and Push, and 2 songs on this 12-inch single, which are Kyoto Song and A Night Like This. And The Cure in Orange, as a film, was broadcast a lot on British television in the 80s. It was cheap to show. It brought a lot of people into the fold, liking the band. Certainly I was one of them. So I was 13, 14 years old. I'd heard of this band. I recorded it when it was on British television at about 11:55 at night. And then my life changed when I watched it the next morning. And I thought, this band are brilliant. And now, even as late as last year, I saw them in Dublin. I saw them in Glasgow, with people who I have never met before, aside through loving that band. And somehow that film has effectively ceased to exist. We've also got, for example, this here, The Cure, which is a show which was recorded in 1992 at the now demolished Auburn Hills Centre, I think in Detroit. Now that version there on VHS contains an extra 5 songs that haven't been officially available for an extremely long time indeed. And in fact, the only version of Cure show which you've been able to buy for easily the last 25 years has been this, which is a double CD. And even the CD was manufactured by a company called MPO. It was subject to a thing called disc rot, and the the disc was quite literally flaking off the CD and couldn't be read. I'm going to talk about another thing which has been kind of forgotten about history. So you might have heard of a band called U2. They did a film called Rattle and Hum in 1988. There was an album. In 2008, 20 years later, they released another film called U2 3D, which was a postcard for that. Only ever shown in theatres. Never released anywhere else. Unavailable on DVD, Blu-ray, wax disc, cassette tape. Never ever came out. And the only place that you could really experience the show was bootleg recordings. But the bootleg recordings were not the same, because U2 3D was recorded over 10 shows. And a couple of those shows don't exist in any form. In fact, this bootleg DVD, which was recorded from a television broadcast of one of the shows that became part of the U2 3D, is the only thing I've got which is even anywhere vaguely near a home video release of U2 3D. And talk about another couple of things which have been kind of like, written out of history. It's inevitable at some point they'll talk about Star Wars. Every bloke, near enough, talks about Star Wars. And if any of them tell you that they don't, they probably do. I'm sure there are some guys out there that don't like it. Yeah, that talking golden dustbin and all that stuff, as Malcolm Tucker put it. The novelisation of Star Wars came out 6 months before the film did in the UK, and there was a huge gap between the release of, for example, Star Wars: The Phantom Menace in America, which came out in May 1999, and the release of that film in the UK in late July 1999. And whilst that in itself doesn't sound like anything, I knew a guy that flew from the UK to America just to watch a Star Wars movie 2 months before it came out in the UK. The first time I saw Star Wars: The Phantom Menace was on a copy of the film that somebody had recorded using a home video camera in a cinema in America and transferred it to a UK videotape and then flew it back to the UK. It's crazy how that happens. But yeah, that's not necessarily why I'm mentioning Star Wars. I'm just anecdoting. What we do have, for example, is the Star Wars DVD box set. Although I've slightly bastardized it. The only place where you have ever been able to buy or own the original theatrical editions of the Star Wars movies digitally has been on these 2-disc DVD sets that were released in 2006. They have been deleted for 14 years. They will never be reissued, presumably for contractual reasons. And they are 4:3 letterbox format, not remastered, taken from the Laserdisc versions. So if you want to watch Star Wars the way you watched it when you were a kid, you either watch it on here or you don't watch it at all, because the last VHS copies were sold, I think, in 2003. The last VHS edition of the original theatrical Star Wars movies was in 1995, and the last VHS player was manufactured in something like 2015. There's going to come a time when you can't play a single VHS tape on any machine. VHS will just disappear out of the universe. Terrible format, not a huge fan of it, but what it does mean is that the original theatrical versions of Star Wars, where Han shot first, where Darth Vader was not played by Hayden Christensen, don't exist anymore. You can't find them officially. They're just not there. It's really dangerous to rewrite history and to take things out of history. I'm going to mention this here now. Rolling Stones, rarities. Is there anything wrong with that picture? Well, I'm going to use a very old-fashioned method. I'm going to show you that picture there and go, can you detect the difference? Oh, they've taken Bill Wyman out of the picture. Now, before we all get all paranoid about things and say, doesn't really matter, it does matter, okay? The Rolling Stones aren't the only people that have done this. Stalin was doing it. He was taking photographs of people that he'd later had shot for treason out of his photographs. The Russian space program removed all references to one of their astronauts on the grounds that he had the misfortune to die before he got to space and so couldn't die a hero. And it's dangerous, because what we're seeing is through the changes that we've got in the world, through the changes that we've got in how we control, or more correctly, in how we understand history, people are rewriting history to suit their own ends. Now, I'm not going to pretend for a second that I'm not guilty of that. Everybody talks about their own life in a way that generally portrays them to be as charitable and as heroic as possible. Everyone thinks that if something bad happened to them, that they've been hard done by an evil person that took advantage of their better nature, generally speaking. And most people will want to look back upon their own personal history and try and rewrite it in a way that is sympathetic to at least their viewpoint. But there is a point when you start to think, actually, you're deluding yourself. And it's the victors that write history. The Allies rewrote the history of World War II. The everyone that's won a war has been the person that's got to tell the story about how it was the evil other side that did the very bad thing indeed, while they were unprovoked and minding their own business. And it becomes very, very dangerous. And what we're also seeing in terms of popular discourse now on Twitter and news and so on and so forth is that people are talking about certain things. They're not mentioning other things because they don't want people to know about those other things. As I've said, everybody is guilty of that. But if you don't understand who you are, if you don't understand how you got to a certain place, if you don't understand the story that leads up to it, you're really at risk of making some fairly big mistakes and about who you are, about how we got to this point, about where we go next, about how we understand how history is constructed and built. And I think it's a huge problem that mankind's going to have. I'm going to mention a couple of other things. Now, this you probably don't know what that is. So that is the only physical copy, the only existing copy of a novel that I've written, which I wrote on a green screen Amstrad, which according to this I wrote between the 20th of June and the 22nd of July 1994, and it quotes a number of songs here, including a section where I royally rip the piss out of Sex Type Thing by the Stone Temple Pilots on the grounds that they're terrible, and Still of the Night by Whitesnake, because they are too awful in my opinion. But this is the only version of this that exists in the world, and the world is full of these lost novels, these lost artworks, these lost movies, these lost albums, bits of history that are falling off and away from us, and no one may very well be interested in the fact that I wrote this. I'm not sure I am, but I've kept it because it's part of how I became who I am today, and how I became me. And becoming ourselves is really, really important. Another one, a third one. I've written 7, by the way, novels in total. Most of them only exist in a physical paper form. And what I'm worried about, and I'm really worried about this for the future, is about the willful destruction of parts of our digital history. They are things that are going to make it very, very difficult for historians in the future and people living today to understand, how did we get here? How did we get to this place? How did, for example, Google decommissioning Google Reader have an effect in killing blog culture, around what happened about important news sites that just simply have been wiped out of history. How did the death of the Google Reader actually disaggregate news functions to the point where people started to become almost click farms, and news became very sensationalized, and we lost the ability to be able to hold people to account, because everyone was chasing clicks and adverts in order to have enough money to eat. At what point did we, as a civilization, disconnect from responsibility and from accountability? There's a lot of things that are happening in politics at the moment that, had they happened 20 or 30 years ago, would be career-ending, resignation level kind of events. These days, well, for, let's say, the people of Flint, Michigan, that have been forced to have unsafe, unsanitary drinking water, it may have been the worst event that ever happened in their lives. But to the people that worked at the petrochemical company that aren't being held accountable by various governments, governors, mayors, etc., that was just a Tuesday. The days when somebody like Boris Johnson, who I have strong views about, but hopefully it's not too controversial to say Boris has an undeclared and unspecified number of children. That is a major security risk. And that is something that actually, 20 or 30 years ago, the Prime Minister having secret children that nobody knows exist would be a resignation level, career-ending moment where someone could very easily go, mate, he could be blackmailed. Now, it appears that there's been a disconnect between responsibility and accountability. And part of that is around controlling and defining the narrative around how people tell the story of history, how we got here, and how things cease to exist. George Orwell was very, very ahead of the game when he wrote 1984. and he said that 2 + 2 = 5, and you had to reject the overwhelming evidence that you saw before your eyes and your ears because the party told you not to. What we have to do is be very, very careful about controlling and being accurate around history, digital footprints, the digital nature of reality. It's going to be a nightmare for historians in future to be able to understand what happened in society, in the world, between about 1994 and now, if not far into the future, when the digital footprints will be erased. There will be no records that will be left. People will just not understand how we got here. They won't understand what happened, what was the detail around this, because it will be locked in dead formats. It will be on laser discs that no one can play. It will be on floppy drives that have rotted and degraded. It will be on videotapes, which, as you can see from my copy of The Cure in orange, are starting to, just oxidize and die and get covered in dust and mold and fungus and all that type of stuff. And if we don't recognize the accuracy of the history of how we got to where we are not going to be able to understand the future. We're not going to be able to make the right decisions for the future, and we can't become who we are, and we can't get to where we are, and we can't be we can't be the best people that we can be if we don't understand how we got here. And I'm going to wrap up there. It feels like I'm hectoring you around it, but I think it's really, really important for mankind in future to try and preserve and maintain the digital legacy that we have, so that we have an accurate record of history. Because when we are all dead and gone, the only thing that will survive, to quote William Burroughs, are the recordings, and the recordings have to be accurate, because otherwise, if we don't know the truth, we are living a lie. And I'm going to draw that to a close. It is around October the 13th. What feels like it's day 207 of the post-COVID world. Hopefully that's not been too boring, and it's not been about records, it's not been about box sets, it's not been talking about mastering and niche stuff like that, but hopefully it's something which you've not been too bored about. The most important thing, I think, is that if we understand how we got here, we understand how we can get out of here. And I think it's fair to say most of us think that the way we are in world history at the moment is a pretty bad place, and we could all do with living in a better world. So I'm going to have a drink out of this lovely mug, and I will catch up with you again at some other point. See you soon. And if you've got any questions, comments, suggestions, anything like that, comment underneath on the YouTube. Subscribe if you want to hear more of my irregular and unfocused rants on conversations about whatever I feel comfortable, or whatever I really, really want to get off my chest in future. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves and stay beautiful. Bye.